Hello everyone, it's Martin Anders Shalazine. With ISO recently released and opinions about him already swirling, most of them negative, I wanted to take a step back, look at the game's current balance, and try to use that to explain why people are as down on him as they are. Let's get right into it. As said, ISO recently hit the PBE as well as had his creator preview event, but opinions are a little bit varied. He certainly hasn't missed the mark in terms of bringing a unique and compelling kit. I mean, hell, he managed to sneak a shield in, and that's something people have feared coming to Valorant almost since the game was released. But that begs the question, if this agent's bringing a mechanic that people were fearful of for it potentially being too overpowered, why do the opinions look like this? You have world-class players and coaches with overwhelmingly negative opinions of ISO. For instance, we have Sentinel's head coach Kaplan saying the only viable single duelists in pro play have the ability to dive out of chokes, ISO doesn't. It's already hard for an agent to earn a flex spot in double controller meta. In single controller comps, that flex spot can go to all the initiators, duelists, and Sage. He's not so subtly hinting that ISO, just by virtue of not having dive, is never going to contest for single duelist slots, which in all fairness is likely accurate, and that in any other composition where there is a little bit more latitude, he simply can't directly contest initiators, the other duelists, or even a Sage. And this is far from an isolated opinion. We have Mini, the now ex-Fnatic head coach, saying in pro play, there are dive duelists and then there are irrelevant duelists. So this puts us at a bit of an impasse, right? You have ISO bringing a mechanic that many people expected to be utterly game-breaking, and at the same time you have coaches and players, incredibly knowledgeable people when it comes to the game, saying he simply doesn't pass muster. He can't beat a base mechanic that is in so many other duelists' kit, and that's going to keep him out of the metagame. If that really is the case, let's take a deeper look at this dive issue. I don't think it's a secret to anyone that dive is in fact the most prevalent duelist type in the game. If we look at these numbers from 2023 champions, they are inarguably dominant. If you go a step further removed and even include pseudo dive or agents that bring another kind of less direct corridor bypass, it becomes just completely unreasonable. You have true dive agents representing just shy of 90% of all duelist play, and if you add in the pseudo-dive agents, that spikes to 95%. So now we have it established that there's definitely something wrong with dive duelists. I mean, you don't get to this point in a game unless there is an inherent balance issue there. So let's start looking at just what that issue is and how systemic it is. To me, there are two clear heads to this issue, one of which is a lot more complex and the other one is a little bit more linear. We'll start with the more complex of the two. In a twist that will be wholly unsurprising to any of the followers of my content, we're going to base a good amount of this one on my style dynamics theory, which dumps every agent in the game into either an aggro, control, or mid-range bucket. If you're unfamiliar with these concepts, I'll put a card up in the corner from my video breaking down this system as I apply it to Valorant, but you may also be familiar with it from something like TCGs. Regardless, the core concept here is that when looking at a team composition, you can usually stratify it into one of these three major buckets as its primary play style. Is it controlling, is it aggro, or is it mid-range? Something I haven't discussed widely up to this point as it pertains to Valorant is another concept borrowed from TCGs and turn-based strategy, which is a splash. To give a bit of a more formal definition to this concept, a splash is when a player dips outside of their archetype's normal pool of cards, characters, or resources for something that has either an outsized power level, introduces a play pattern altering wrinkle in their game plan, or shores up one of their noteworthy weaknesses. You see, we see splashes in Valorant all the time, we just don't necessarily use a formal label for them from a theoretical perspective. I personally believe that splashes, and more specifically how efficient splashes are, is why dive is seeing such an outsized presence in the game. You can look at aggro as an archetype and its love for tempo, and by splashing a dive duelist, you simply get access to that corner of the triangle at too efficient a rate than if you were to build a composition from scratch with a more concerted focus. Necessarily think that this splash efficiency issue is something that is particular to these dive agents and aggro. I've highlighted here the agents that I believe to be overly efficient splashes in the game right now. And you see this trickle up even to the highest levels of play. It's not a coincidence that if you look at the composition I developed for Fnatic's Lotus this past year, it was a mid-range control hybrid with just a light aggro splash from a Raze. I took the stylistic archetypes I thought were best suited to preemptively counter the map's meta, and then I just brought the one thing that was missing in a way that was too efficient to deny. Fortunately, I think Riot's hot on the tails of this issue, and they're well aware of the fact that Dive can't be allowed to continue as just the ubiquitously most efficient way of getting aggro into a composition. The 709 PBE notes had Raze's blast packs being dialed back to a point where they can't just autopilot through bottleneck denial anymore. And that transitions us nicely to the other side of the coin, which is, I don't think Dive being good is the only problem. It's just as much about the fact that bottleneck denial is too weak and has been for a good amount of time. It's been dialed back again and again, and we haven't seen any sort of rebound or introduction of additional tools for it, or at least when we have, they've severely missed the mark. And that brings us to this. Everyone's least favorite agent, Deadlock. You see, I think Deadlock was a very intentional effort to try to curb Dive's efficacy in the game, and it just missed. You have the overwhelming majority of players and coaches looking at her and saying, well, these trips can't be trips, ergo she's bad, instead of looking at her kit on a more holistic basis and how the utility is probably actually meant to be used. To put it simply, I think that Deadlock was a full-stop anti-dive agent. We can look at this example from one of the playbooks that I released for Premiere on my Patreon. It's a pretty standard default. We've got the controller playing solo B anchor, jump spotting B main, we've got the Deadlock playing tower as a reactive wall for mid, similarly to how you'd be playing a Sage historically, we've got Raze playing second contact from vents, we've got Jett playing ramp, and we've got Cypher as a solo anchor on A. Note, we aren't pretending like the Deadlock utility is going to be some sort of passive information tool. We're not trying to allocate it towards vents, we're not trying to use it for mail info. It is simply put on site B as an entrenchment enabler. And why do we do it like that? Well, let's look at the most meta compositions for Split. They've all got double dive, and so what happens when double dive tries to get out B main? Standard routing for both of these agents is a Cloudburst dash towards Wood for the Jett and a double satchel towards New Box for the Raze. In both of these situations, they're diving directly into a stun. This allows our controller player, whether it's Astra or Omen, to have some form of time to set up a counterattack against this dive. It could be a suck from the Astra, reducing any sort of follow-up and allowing her to contest the divers. If it's an Omen, it could be a Paranoia to counteract the dives as they come out. In the case of Omen, it also gives ample opportunity to reposition, set up an even better Paranoia, and allow reinforcement from the Deadlock tower. So we've got dive agents that are too strong, but we have Sentinels as well who are already trying to clearly counteract that ability to dive. We're also seeing this again in recent patches. The 709 PBE patch for Cypher squarely buffs his ability to counteract many of these dive scenarios. Combined with the Raze satchel nerfs, Cypher is now going to in many ways accomplish a similar end to what I believe Deadlock was intended to do. He'll do it at the bottlenecks, whereas Deadlock was designed to do it on sites in more directly contestable spaces. But this will drop us at a little bit of an interesting conclusion, because those of you who follow all of my style dynamics theory are going to say, well, what the hell? Why is Control now all of a sudden able to beat aggro? And I don't think that that's really what's happening here. I think what we're creating is a scenario where Control can actually fight back against aggro, and aggro can't just autopilot. You're going to end up in a scenario where for aggro to truly beat Control, as it should from a stylistic perspective, they're going to have to bring things like KO. You're not just going to sling yourself through entrenchment utility anymore, you're going to have to actually beat it either by shutting it off or by being methodical and wearing it down. And so while Dive is damn near omnipotent for now, I do believe its days are numbered. The dev team clearly has it in its crosshairs. We've got buffs for Cypher and a rework for Deadlock coming down the pipeline, so all there is really to do now is wait and try to preempt it. Way back in the day in 2021, when I originally joined Fnatic, one of the things that I made a cornerstone of my pitch to Mini was, I think Jett's days are numbered. We need to have Dereka starting to learn Raze. And I think that if I were to join a team now, I would have a similar attitude. I think we are coming to the end of the age of dive in Valorant, whether that be in 2 months, in 3 months, in 6 months. The dev team is clearly taking the steps to move away from it, and so you might as well get ahead. I think that if I were to be on a mission with my duelists, I would say learn your Phoenix, learn your Neon, hell, even maybe learn your Reyna, and be ready, because a change is coming, and you're either going to be ready for it or you're not. Closing things out, we have the normal housekeeping. If you made it this far, hopefully I've earned a like and subscribe and you've enjoyed the video. If you'd like to support me further, you can also catch me intermittently on Twitch at AndersTV or on my Patreon, AndersTV, where I release tier lists every single patch that cover both agents as I see them in terms of viability on a map-by-map basis, as well as premier composition tier lists and premier playbooks that are geared towards being easy to implement with you and your teammates regardless of play level. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.